Today I want to talk about the false self. It's that feeling that happens when you perpetually feel like hijacked, right, on your path. Like, I want to do this, I want to do this, I want to do this, I want to move forward, I want to transform, I want to achieve this, I want to be in this relationship, I want to feel like this, but I always fall back into this pattern. I always get triggered. And then I fall into shame, contraction, fear, anxiety, and the list goes on. I want to tell 3 stories of examples of how the false self shows up and it hijacks the path of our unique self emergence. And by unique self, we mean the particular life that you're here to live, the way of being and becoming, the way of feeling and experiencing the world, and the gifts being able to be given that you're able to be given into your unique circle of influence and intimacy. And this arises because we realize that you are a unique self, meaning you are woven into the fabric of reality. All of reality is interconnected. All of your relationships are interconnected, and you are expressing a unique quality of being out of that entire field of reality, the fabric of reality, the evolutionary unfolding of reality. You are a unique expression of that evolving, unfolding field. This is a term, and this is the teaching that comes out of Dr. Marc Gafni's teaching on the unique self, which he wrote a book about in 2012, and he's writing another book in process, and he's written a lot about what it means to live as a unique self. And it's basically an enlightened realization of who you and I truly are, but 99.9% of humanity is asleep to this as a lived identity, right? Most people at some point in their lives have glimpses. Probably everyone has glimpses of what it means to be a unique expression of all of reality. But they either justify it away, deny it, rationalize it away, or just say, that was then, this is now, or turn it into some egoic striving for something, right? So your unique self describes a vision of your unfolding future, just as it is currently available right now. The false self is a construct in yourself, in ourselves, that was created in our early years, our early months even. It was created because of an experience of some sort of shock to the system, some sort of overwhelm, trauma. It could be small t trauma, big T trauma, but some sort of strongly impactful, overwhelming experience. It's called the false core. And out of the false core, when we start to create language, so we first have an immediate somatic imprint on the body. And as we create language, out of that comes simple language that we identify as who I am. So if I have a contraction, I over time create an identity around that contraction that might be something like I'm unlovable, or I'm not good enough, or I'm alone, or I'm ugly, or I'm not needed, or not wanted, or I don't belong, I'm imperfect. There's a lot of ways that this shows up. But that false core sentence then is part of a false self pattern of feeling, sensing, and thinking, as well as actions that we take in response to our surroundings and our experiences, that gets triggered anytime the underlying assumptions of the false core, of the false self, are triggered or experience themselves to be, even if it's not the same kind of example or a situation, whatever that, there's flavors of that original wound. It triggers a false self response. It triggers a way of being, a way of acting, a way of thinking in response to whatever the situation is. Okay, so situation one, example one. These are from my clients. One of my clients was an executive director of an organization that she wanted to really make it scalable and inclusive, and she wanted to grow the organization in a way that felt good in people's bodies, that it wasn't just a repeat of kind of a standard capitalistic model where you are hyper-productive at the expense of your own well-being. So she wanted to really create this kind of organization that would evolve to promote healing and transformation and flourishing by all the stakeholders as they were participating in it, including herself. But what happened was that she found herself running into this experience where she would get triggered. Maybe the board would critique her initiative, or maybe a board member would step down, or maybe a staff member would say something critical. And it would trigger this experience of anxiety and fear and shame, and this belief, this voice in her that says, I'm alone. I'm all alone here. That no one understands me, no one gets me, people are not here to work with me, they're here to tear me down, they're here to challenge me. I'm here at the top of this organization, I've got to figure it all myself, got to do it all myself, I'm all alone. And what this caused her to do was to spend many more hours than she was wanting to spend trying to figure out every aspect of the strategic plan and the operational budget and the logistics for the retreat, and it goes on and on. She put on herself the burden of basically being the executive director and also the COO, if you will, the director of every department. She would get involved in so much, and it would lead her to burnout. She would basically collapse, sometimes earlier than Friday, but definitely on Friday afternoon, her body would just collapse and shut down. And it would just be a spiral where it would be, see, I'm all alone, and I'm feeling terrible, and I'm all alone, and it would be hard for her. And so we worked together on what was called a Self Alchemy practice. This is where we'd go inside and we'd explore and become, first and foremost, cultivate compassionate presence. Actually be intimate with myself, like, what's going on here? And actually breathe into it and be with it and open to the feeling, open to the experience in a safe way. And then ask, what is it that you need? What do you care about? Oh, I care about effectiveness. I also care about my well-being and health. She would go through this whole process to alchemize the false core, the false self, and pretty quickly, but also gradually over time, it would unravel, it would be dismantled, and she has now, so every time she was able to do that, it would metabolize the experience of the trigger and return to her this sense of spaciousness. I can breathe again, right? I can have this hard conversation with this employee. I can ask my board for this kind of support. I can let go of this project and not need to figure all the details out. I can show up in what I authentically want to, how I want to run this workshop or this retreat, and feel alive, feel connected to what I really love to do. And so this is something that she's been working with, and more recently she's been able to make the hard calls, make the hard decisions of doing the layoffs when necessary, of canceling certain programs in order to preserve and be in a sustainability mindset and create sustainability in her organization when 2026 has been the most unstable, uncertain, overwhelming year that they can think of. Right? So she has been able to find her way in this, participating in this evolutionary activism, if you will, creating an organization that balances well-being with performance, that's able to include the different voices at the table without getting bogged down and stifled and paralyzed by them. Situation two, example two from another client. So he was stuck in, he found himself stuck in depression and doom scrolling most mornings. And he couldn't get out of bed often. It took him a while to get out of bed, and he felt so alone. He came to me and brought this up, and we discovered that his false core sentence growing up was, I'm not good enough. In other words, if I don't win, I'm not worthy, right? So I have to win. In order to do anything, I have to win to be good enough. And if I'm messy, if I'm uncomfortable, if I'm vulnerable, it actually is equal to losing. So we went through the Self Alchemy process. I brought him through unique self coaching, and by the way, what he wanted, his unique risk, his purpose, his deepest heart's desire, was to really lean into conversations and creative projects that responded to the meta crisis and that created a world where people feel alive and thriving. And he just kept getting stuck, and he lost all motivation, and he got depressed, and he had trouble reaching out to those people. So through the work together, we discovered, and we actually did a process where we went back in his early story where this false core sentence originated. And we not only retold the story, but we went through and did some actual healing. Right? He was able to bring compassion and presence and awareness to his younger self in a way that liberated that spark, that energy that was trapped. And so, since then he's recovered. He's been able to travel quite a bit. He's been able to get out of the house. He's even reached out and been leading conversations online and LinkedIn and other places specifically about the meta crisis and proposing his own ideas about the status of the world and artificial intelligence. And he's been reaching out to different friends and colleagues and having these really great conversations. So he took his risk. He's been taking his risk because the false self was no longer in the driver's seat. It was simply part of his life autobiography that was in the passenger seat, in the back seat, that was able to give him information and he was able to draw from, but it was not leading the show. And so this false self alchemized into actually a great ally to him, because it brought in this quality of, and what I forgot to mention is part of what we discovered is that he had a hard time being messy and uncomfortable, but when he realized that one of the things he could be really good at, this is where the false self actually became an ally, is it kept him pointing to, what can I be good at? How can I be good at something? And he realized, I can be good at bringing vulnerability and the messiness of life into conversations in a way it brings my power, my greatness, as well as the messiness, as all woven into my what I'm good at. And so his unique self began to thrive, and it's continuing. And by the way, in all these situations, and I'm going to tell you one more example, it's never an achievement that we get to and we're done. The false self and our work as emerging as unique selves is a lifelong process. It's maybe a lifetime's long process that requires spiraling, right? We're spiraling, always spiraling back. But every time we revisit the same triggers, evolution, if we evolve through this, if we deepen our intimacies, the triggers don't drive us as much, and we are able to, bring more consciousness, wisdom, compassion, presence to them every time. And so it's actually something new that's being created every time we revisit a trigger and a false self. A third example is my own life journey with my false self. So, where do I start? When I started going through the unique self-emergence process around 2021, so about 5 years ago, I had been moving houses moving homes, about every year and a half for the past 15 years. So as soon as college was over, no, as soon as high school was over, I moved homes every year and a half or so on average. And when I came to this unique self-emergence, I started to realize that my false sentence, my false core sentence is, I'm not lovable. And so I would, and what I did was that I would create conditions to prevent myself from experiencing that I'm not lovable. I wouldn't give myself the opportunity to stay in relationships and friendships locally for a long enough duration in order to experience the possibility of being rejected, or that our paths would go different directions, or somehow that I would have the possibility of feeling unlovable, unloved. So I just would avoid it by following the next possibility, the next big thing, the next exciting venture. So I led an adventurous life. But it was an adventurous life that was very unstable. And I had a hard time truly giving my unique gifts and living my unique risk, which was related to, interestingly enough, masterfully energizing evolutionary relationships, right? Through different kinds of work that I do currently and the different kinds of life. So that, in other words, my unique risk was about, in various forms, personally, just being in evolving relationships, and professionally, coaching, facilitating, consulting for organizational development, for leadership development, for personal life growth and development. And I kept getting stunted on this path, and there's so many detours I took. When I started to work with this self-alchemy practice and go through the unique self-emergence process and go deeper and deeper and deeper, I was able to truly alchemize, metabolize this experience to where I've actually, for the last 4 years, I've lived in the same home with mostly the same people. Longest I've lived anywhere, actually. And it happens to be called the House of Belonging. That's the title of our house. I didn't do that intentionally, just worked it out that way, so that's ironic. And it's an experience that I feel greatly, really loved, deeply loved. I've also become engaged to be married. So I'm committed to a life partner who will become my wife. 2 examples of what the false self was preventing me from doing in the past. I actually was engaged 10 years ago, and I broke it off. And so now I feel much more grounded and stable and able to step into my power as an evolutionary activist, as someone who facilitates and masterfully energizes evolutionary relationships everywhere I go. Now, again, this is never something that's ended and complete. It's something that we are always working with. But it becomes, Marc Gafni often says, the detour is the destination. That becomes more and more true the more and more we face these spirals of the false self, for example, that the triggers, the contractions. Every time there's a contraction, there's a new piece of information of my personal sacred autobiography that I can harvest and reintegrate into my unique self. 15 years ago, I was at maybe the height of my chronic pain. And today I'm probably at the lowest it's ever been. It's like 10% of my chronic pain. So there's obviously more work to do in that department. But it's also this realization, as unique selves, we become more and more comfortable with discomfort and the inevitability of suffering and pain. And Marc Gafni today actually reminded us that the opposite of pain is not pleasure. The opposite of pain is comfort. And in order to experience true pleasure, we need both comfort and pain. So the false self is not a mistake, ultimately. It's a detour, but it's also a destination. It's designed, it's not a flaw in the system, it's a feature. It's actually meant to be the case. It provides the scaffolding for what's ours to do in this world. Because if you think about it, we are wounded and we participate in that kind of wounding. Reality is wounded, right? And when we have our unique wound, our false core pattern, our false core sentence, our ability to work in the healing and transformation of our unique experience of wounding and our false self actually is our healing and transformation of all of reality. So if we do the work for ourselves, then in the morphogenetic field of relationality, we are doing it on behalf of every single man, woman, and child who experiences a similar kind of false self. And somehow, in some looking at complexity science and morphogenetic resonance, morphic resonance theory, those men, women, and children actually have the possibility of a little bit more healing and transformation because of what I can do in my own life. So may this be giving you blessings and energy and fuel on your journey. Thank you.